Hi, I'm Michael Williams. I think all of you know me. I write for myself and for Falstaff Books. And today I'm going to read from a new novel that I have just had published by Falstaff Books. That is the first, it turns out, in a 5-book series called A Fall in Autumn. It is a far future science fiction detective story set 9,000 years or so from now, in a time when humanity knows that we existed and they have heard legends about us, and to them we are basically Atlantis. We are a culture that allowed ourselves to be destroyed by our own technological hubris. And in that future, they enjoy tremendous creativity and control over biotechnology and genetic engineering. They have developed a society that is ruled, in theory, as an egalitarian society, but in practice there is a sort of 1% that's more like a 25% of people who have genetic modifications and improvements and are referred to as human plus. There are a few people who are referred to as artisanal humans, who are people who have never received the benefit of any genetic modification, and our narrator is an arty. And then there is a massive underclass that in theory enjoys all the rights and privileges of personhood, but in practice rarely does. Referred to as mannies, but they are human-animal hybrids. They are people who have been created for the work that they do. There are also a few people referred to as golems, who are remnants of the ancient world that was lost and are considered sort of these wise, perfect elders. They're very much the old man on the mountain kind of figures. It is impossible to imagine a golem breaking the law, things like that. It's not unusual for somebody to have seen a golem out in the world, like at the mall, but it is very unusual to develop a friendship with one. And in this novel, the narrator has been hired. He's a detective in the last of the great flying cities of the ancients, called Autumn. And he is a detective. He is a detective in Autumn and has been hired by a golem. So the section that my publisher put a bookmark in when he handed me the paper copy from which I'm reading and said, read this part, is this. The sun was over the trees at the southeastern edge of the slope opening into the forest when I awoke. I'm going to back up. The golem and the golem client and the detective have spent the night together in a part of the park where people do things like that. The sun was over the trees at the southeastern edge of the sloped opening in the forest when I awoke. The sun woke me, actually, its rays on my face, the flicker of shadow and light as it played across my closed eyes. I was half-dressed, my shoes off, my feet bare, and my coat spread over me in lieu of a blanket. My shirt was somewhere, probably. I wasn't wearing it anyway, and my eyes hadn't opened yet, but I could feel it nearby, the way you can sense an old dog by your chair, or a former lover on the opposite side of an otherwise perfectly nice party. My back curled against something firm and supporting, and I felt gentle fingers stroke the tufts of silvery black at my temples. Hematite, a man told me once. I would always love him a little for saying that. My hair there wasn't yet gray, but was no longer black, and when wet it looked like hematite, and he said it like that meant something deep and significant and mystical I didn't understand. Having someone's fingers run through it felt good, though. It felt like a happy memory, like something I didn't expect would happen much anymore if it ever really happened in the first place. That simple touch was a comfort to me. It's the most minor thing, and for that reason the most missed when it's gone. I don't go long stretches without being touched, but it had been a while between caresses. This was that, a caress and more, not exactly sexual, but not exactly platonic. It was that happy in-between we call intimate. I made myself vulnerable to other men, and they themselves to me, more times than I can count in my too short life. It didn't always work out, though, that my usual flavor of street trade would show basic human kindness in return for mine. None of that mattered, though. Those guys were long gone. Right that second, someone ran his fingers through my half-asleep hair, intimate and kind and caressing. I felt vulnerable, and that was okay. For a few moments, I wasn't dying, and I wasn't scared. I wasn't lonely, and I wasn't alone. The sun felt good, and the breeze through the branches sounded like Gaia herself telling me to go back to sleep. I thought for a moment I might be okay with dying fairly soon if I got to wake up like this every morning for the rest of my life. Okay, I groaned. I didn't move, and I didn't open my eyes because I wasn't quite ready for the moment to go away, even as I lifted the pin to pop its balloon. You want something, so tell me what it is, because if I say yes, I may not have much time to hold up my end of the bargain. My voice dispelled all the magic of the moment, but his fingers were still at my temple, resting there, ready to go back to what we shared moments before. I rolled over and looked up at Alejandro, his purple hair down over half his face as he leaned on one elbow. I didn't kiss him, but I did put one hand to his jaw and brush his cheek with my thumb. I wondered if he could feel that, really feel that, like skin feels it. Let's not pussyfoot around this. You want me to do something. The whole story about the angel and thinking someone was trying to kill you was bullshit, but there was something there, something worth chasing. So let's have the truth now and get on with things. I tried to smile at him. His expression was completely blank. With the hand he used to brush my temples, he laid a fingertip behind my ear, cupping my face with barely a single point of contact. He still didn't smile, but his eyes searched my face, my own eyes, for something. It occurred to me the correct phrasing might be to say he searched my eyes for someone. I assumed he'd been alive long enough to know a hell of a lot of people, and I would bet a nickel he looked for one of them in me. There are 100 romantic stories about golems, meat sacks like me throwing ourselves at a golem out of infatuation with their embodiment of agelessness. If he'd been there before, heard 100,000 of us wail about mortality, and still willing to hear number 100,001, he must have a lot of love for humankind. No, I thought, more than that. He must have loved the hell out of one of us at some point. Maybe he was waiting for that guy to walk back into his life, re-emerging from the vast but finite pool of genetic factors we possess as a species. I wondered if I simply seemed close enough to that long-lost lover to pass muster for a night. I also wondered what made a golem want to get laid in the first place. Ever the detective, after all. I really did see an angel in splendor, Alejandro said. He still wasn't smiling. If anything, he had the muted seriousness, the understated gravitas I'd long since come to recognize as the posture of someone telling the truth at long last. I wondered how long it had been. I swear it to you. I swear it. He surprised me then because he didn't cry. Golems don't have tear ducts, but his eyelids quivered with the autonomic response to strong emotion. He still hadn't moved at all, and we were shielded from the breeze so that his hair hung straight down like a perfectly still and settled curtain across half the stage of his face. And I believe it would try to kill me if it knew I were here. Of which, I replied, you seem genuinely afraid, so you must believe it is here. Yes, Alejandro said, I am convinced it has come here or will come here in the future, so it might bring down the last of the great cities, the same way it brought down splendor before. So that part's legit. I shifted around to put one arm under my head, but Alejandro glided to intercept me and put his own there to cradle me instead. It put our faces close together. I thought he was about to kiss me, but instead he was whispering as quietly as he could. I realized he had vocal cords and pushed air through them like the rest of us, rather than having a speaker installed in his chest. I could feel his false breath on my face as he spoke. It smelled like me. Yes, he spoke very softly. That part is absolutely true. You really did see an angel. Again, yes. He didn't seem annoyed to be made to say it over and over again. I really did. He trailed off, searching for the words. And he really had accomplices. They committed murder. He looked me right in the eye. Again, I swear it to you. Tell me what it looked like. I'd seen plenty of drawings of angels in books and ancient histories, of course. Big, masculine, rippling with muscles like geological strata, impossibly beautiful with vast white wings and harps, and sometimes flaming swords. Now Alejandro looked away, searching his memory, or making something up. That cynically suspicious part of me was never going to give up, but it was a little slower off the starting block this time. There was something sincere, something truthful in Alejandro's demeanor I didn't see when he spoke to me the first time. On that first occasion, in retrospect, he seemed a little rehearsed. So there's that. Were any of you in the Horror Authors Roundtable this weekend? Other than you, because you were there. Then I'm going to read one of my favorite parts of Perishables. Actually, I'm going to read a different part of Perishables. A different favorite part. So Perishables is the first novel of the Withrow Chronicles. It is 3 novellas tied together. They are about a vampire. The first one is about a vampire encountering the zombie apocalypse at a meeting of his neighborhood's Homeowners Association's executive board. And the second story is about a very intelligent woman who is the administrator of a supercomputer at a very small Bible college encountering the same zombie apocalypse. And the third story is about them meeting each other 6 years later. But I am going to read this from Perishables. At this point in the story, they know that something is up in their neighborhood. They don't know exactly what is up in their neighborhood, and they the power behind the throne of their neighborhood's association has gone outside to see what's up and prove that everything is okay. And Withrow, smelling trouble, has gone out back and has now detected that there is more going on than probably these humans can cope with. I opened my eyes, and the night was gone. Darkness is no enemy of mine, and these old eyes can slice right through it. Smiles was watching me, waiting patiently for a command. I signaled him to stay and went out the gate to the front yard. Mary Lou was standing at the curb on the grass, looking one way and then another and shifting her weight between her feet. Her lips were moving, but I don't think she was exactly in charge of what was coming out. Fight or flight is not an instinct many people are really at home with anymore in their insulated little lives. I strode up and cleared my throat from about 6 feet back. Mary Lou whipped around with wide eyes, took a moment to recognize me, then turned back and looked mutely up the street. I took 2 more steps to stand beside her, and I followed her gaze. 3 corpses in their one-time Sunday best were staggering mindlessly in small circles in the middle of the street. They were probably 30, maybe 40 feet away. If they had noticed us yet, they didn't have much in the way of showing it. They just turned and turned and turned again, arms stiff by their sides, hands clenching and unclenching reflexively. You won't mind that I don't describe their faces. Whoa. Mary Lou was outside the mind of someone who could form words for the moment. It is said that there are things stranger in heaven and earth, etc., and they ain't kiddin'. I know the world holds some esoteric and arcane shit because I am one of those things myself, but I had never seen the dead literally walk. I mean, we've all seen the movies, right? I have anyway. Shit, for solid 3 decades, all I had to do at night was watch old movies on UHF channels. These fellas weren't exactly Night of the Living Dead, and they weren't exactly Frankenstein. No one could confuse them for a mutant or for a junkie on a bad batch. They were dead things, plain and simple, walking around. They did not moan, they did not hiss or growl, they just turned in slow circles, around and around, their eyes locked in front of them. Go inside, I said to Mary, very softly. Just go inside. Lock the door behind you. She still wasn't very capable of listening and just stood there. I started to get antsy. Surely they would notice us eventually, right? Surely they would sense we were there, smell us or hear us or see us or something. They were dead, yeah, but in the movies, that's always how it happens. Someone screams and then the zombies all stop what they're doing, turn slowly, and charge. I really didn't want to be in that scene of the movie. I always hated those parts the worst, when some idiot loses their shit and gets everybody else killed. I put my hand around Mary Lou's chin and turned her head so that she looked me in the eye. With all the force of personality I could muster, I bored my mind into hers and said very distinctly, go inside and lock the door and let no one inside after you. There's a reason why the Count always gets what he wants when he's alone with somebody in the vampire flicks. Mary foggily turned around and started stumbling back towards her front door. I watched her go, checking over my shoulder to see if the 3 walkers up the road had heard us or anything, and as she neared the front door, she reached for the knob. The door opened before she got there, though, and her husband, Franklin, not Frank, poked his head out. "Everything okay out here?" he called to me unnecessarily loudly. He was scared, and he wanted to demonstrate to everyone that everything was precisely okay out here. I heard the scuffling in the street stop and turned around to look. None of the walkers were looking at me, but they had turned towards the house and their front door and the source of that shout. They started shuffling towards the house, and their stiff arms started to twitch. I will kill that man before they do, I swear to God, I thought. What I said, however, was yelled over my shoulder. "Get her in there and shut that fucking door." "Well, there's no need for," Franklin started to say, but Mary was still under my orders, so she shoved him back inside, followed after him, shut the door calmly behind herself, and I heard the deadbolt slam home. That was something, at least. The walkers were making achingly slow progress. In 5 seconds, they got about as many feet, and so I clicked my cheeks twice. Smiles jumped the Reinhold's fence from a sitting start and bounded up to my side. "Guard," I said, and Smiles braced himself on all fours, eyes on the lead walker, a growl just starting to climb the stairs way down in the bottom of his chest. Picture the scene for the moment, if you will. A suburban McMansion squats on an otherwise 60s-ish street. The house itself is mammoth and beige and appears to have been dispensed from a machine designed to manufacture the word dull made manifest. A morbidly obese guy in blue jeans and a kitten t-shirt is standing there with his arms crossed over his chest. A Rottweiler 2 sizes too big is standing next to him ready for a fight. A droplet of pink foam is at one corner of the dog's mouth. It growls deeply like a bone saw dropped 3 octaves. There are 3 obviously dead people in black suits walking towards them. Their arms twitch, their hands clutch at the air, their faces are expressionless because their faces aren't really there anymore. In the distance, a small dog is working its heart out to sustain a crescendo of barking. A man is shouting questions inside the house behind them. The walkers come painfully slowly down the street, shoes dragging, one of them barely able to walk for what appears to be a crushed hip. He's injured in a way that for a living thing would spell death, but he's still moving under his own power. They approach to 20 feet. They approach to 15. The fat man draws a breath. I want to know, ready to fight. I would have killed all 3 of them, again, I guess, right out in the street in front of God and the Neighborhood Association's executive board and everybody. I would answer their questions later. I could come up with a story about a martial arts class I signed up for, a home gym I bought, some semi-plausible reason why a guy who looks like me would know that much about hand-to-hand combat. I drew one great breath and flexed every muscle in my body and heard my heart jerk in my chest so that it said "thudup" very loudly, and old blood started to push through my veins, because blood does many things for my kind. Hearing a heartbeat, even our own fake one, can do wonders for morale. The lead walker got within 10 feet of me, and I kicked out one leg so that I was standing with my feet spread, one forward of the other, hands open, arms bent at the elbow. I was ready to pounce, and Smiles had shifted his weight so that his front was crouching and his ass was in the air, ready to do the same. His growl was a powerful and steady grating, and I started to growl myself, the 2 of us ready to kill. The lead walker got within 5 feet of me and stopped, then wheeled and started shuffling more quickly in the other direction. I blinked, and Smiles' growl ceased for a moment. The leader stumbled right past the other 2, got about 10 feet, and started doing circles again. The other 2 likewise got within 5 feet of us, spun around, and headed in the other direction. I relaxed for a moment and watched them. Smiles wasn't going to move until I gave him another command, so I stepped gingerly around to my right and forward in an arc, keeping about 10 feet between me and the lead walker. Then I stepped within 5 feet of him, and he tore off as best he could in the opposite direction. I tried it again with one of the others and got the same result. The walking dead, I realized, were afraid of me. One of the ones I'd spooked made the mistake of staggering within a couple of feet of Smiles, and my old dog was quick to react. He had the guy's throat in his teeth before I could make a sound, and 2 seconds later Smiles was standing on its chest. I heard bones snap, and the walker's head popped clean off, rolling a few feet before bumping against the curb. The body was limp under Smiles, and he stood there growling at the corpse's head where it came to rest. So they feared me, but not my dog. I thought about this long enough to realize it before a phrase I hate to think on overmuch came to mind, unbidden. Food chain. I gave Smiles the command to heal, as anxious as he was to go after the other 2 walkers, and I gave the fear and revulsion I felt for these things a few seconds to subside. Deep breaths are calming, even when your lungs are just for show. I let their aimless, stumbling presence in the street settle into my view. I did my best to calm myself, and then I opened up my senses again and let them wash out over the neighborhood. Televisions and radios were still playing in other houses. Either the neighbors didn't know about these things yet, or it was too late for those folks. They weren't my primary concern anyway. I wanted to know if there were more of them. I could hear the two nearby, of course, and I could hear smiles, accelerated breathing. Then I could hear voices inside Franklin and Mary Lou's house. Sounded like they were still doing some arguing in there. Underneath it all, I could still hear scuffling feet farther away, old dress shoes dragging across asphalt in all directions. The neighborhood was full of these things. I'd have guessed a dozen or more, and I needed to decide now whether to deal with them myself or wait for help to arrive. My reverie was broken when I heard glass shatter around the back of the house, and the two walkers in the street stopped and turned in that direction. 2 seconds later, screams erupted from inside, and I sicked smiles on one of the walkers while I ran down another. With a single punch, I popped the head and neck off of mine, and Smiles had taken the other one out at the knees. "Here," I commanded, and Smiles let go of it to come bounding after me. All 3.5 bucks of me were moving as fast as I could make them go, and in a flash I'd kicked the front door down on Mary Lou and Franklin's house with one foot and was stepping inside with the other. Smiles shot past and dug his claws into the hardwoods to stop a few feet in front of me, eyes forward. I glanced around to see what the hell was happening. Kathy and Herb were in each other's arms in the middle of the living room, and Mary Lou and Franklin and the new kid, Jeremy, were pressed against the stairs, cowering. A walker was standing in the dining room, its feet hung in those gauzy drapes on the French doors. What was left of Killer, I am not terribly sad to say, was clutched in one hand, and the walker was reaching forward with the other, fingers twitching, clawing at the air to try to pull free of those drapes. Everyone was screaming all at once. I grimaced and slammed the door shut behind me. "Stay!" I bellowed as Smiles shook his flanks about to lunge. I strode forward, shoved Kathy and Herb down behind the coffee table, walked around the couch into the dining room, and stopped at the other end of the table from the walker. Its eyes fell on me, and it snarled. You ever watch two dogs that were playing all of a sudden get into a real fight? They were just having a normal time, and then one growls the wrong way and the other answers instinctively. I bent a little at the knees, clenched my fists, and did something I should never have done in front of another living being. My lips curled out of the way so that my fangs could drop down, and I growled long and low, and every light flickered for a moment, and every shadow in that house got just a little darker. All the screaming stopped, like a switch, and Smiles started barking as I leapt, knowing the walker would just try to run if I got closer. Knocked the table to one side and went straight for that one outstretched arm. I grabbed near the elbow in both hands, the walker emitting something like a strangled scream. With one long arced motion, I'd wrenched it free of the drapes, gotten it airborne, and brought its back down over one knee with an unmistakable splintering sound. On the rebound, I caught its neck in my hands, planted my shoe against its spine, and tugged till I heard that pop. I hefted the head back through the broken glass of the door and threw the body after it. I turned back around, and everyone was staring at me. "You're going to need to seal these windows," I said. Everyone was silent and pale, even Jeremy, whose skin had gone from cream coffee to a sick beige, and I checked myself. I was lisping. My fangs were still out. That's the first Withrow novel. And let's see, I'm going to read from the third Withrow novel. I have to find my place in this one, though. So in Deal with the Devil, Withrow is dealing with the fact that Durham has its first superhero and its first supervillain, and neither of those are good things. And he has taken it upon himself to solve these problems. In the course of it, he has also discovered that there is a demon running around in Durham and all kinds of things. So at this point, he has decided that it is necessary to get the help of a group of magicians. And there's some exposition that I'm skipping, and he says, of neo-paganism. He says, "It's not for me, but no significant spiritual belief system is. I wouldn't have a God who would take me, to be honest. I think we're in this all on our own, and it's up to us to make the most of it. Every vampire agrees with me deep down, no matter how many nights of the month they dress up like Marie Laveau or Jerry Falwell or my Aunt Myrtle and claim to tune in to some higher power. Oh, sure, some vampires fall into the religion trap. I think it's a weakness, though. It's hedging a bet when they're already cheating to win. We're supposed to have successfully eliminated the afterlife as a concern. Religious yahoos, on the other hand, obsessively engage in publicly performing the qualifying lap for their preferred vision of the sweet by and by. Bible-thumping vampires may say it's all about saving their soul or whatever other bullshit reason they can gin up to look sad. But let's get real for a second. They don't regret what they became. If they did, it would be easy to correct the mistake. Guaranteed suicide is never more than a sunrise away. So I don't buy into the ceremonial claptrap myself. Beyond its psychological power to shape someone's intentions and maybe ignite a little confirmation bias when they search for results of their work, I think it's just a game of dress-up. I know some people do really believe in it, though they weren't exactly physicists. They were more like really interesting librarians. Still, you start with the contacts you have, not the contacts you wish you had, and lucky me, it was a book sale weekend at the library in Chatham County. The book people. That's what they call themselves. I originally thought that meant they were Muslims. There's this concept in Islam of people of the book, which is a fancy way of saying Jews and Christians are kind of special because technically they all worship the same God. But they just meant the people. But they just meant the people who were crazy into books. There were 7 of them, 2 men and 5 women, mostly older. One of them was a young Latina who told me she was the first person in her family to be literate in English. Her accent was absolutely undetectable. It was impressive. The rest of them are various shades of cracker white, except for a black guy named Warren who teaches the occasional poetry class at a school in Raleigh. He's a retired sports writer or something. He doesn't talk much, and I've never spent much time around them because the book people give off a kind of a weird vibe. It's like you're really seriously the hell harshing their vibe when you're speaking to them because that's time they could have spent nose deep in a book. They haunt book sales. I don't mean they're just there all the time drifting around. I mean they show up at night when the venue is closed and they do things. I still don't really understand it, but it strikes me as a fancy form of coin flipping. The only difference is their coin is a library and it has a different face for every sentence of every book. The Chatham County Library book sale doesn't happen at the library proper. They have it at this little Lions Club building in what I guess you call downtown Pittsboro. Pittsboro is little more than a traffic circle, an old courthouse that burned and collapsed a couple of years ago, and a secondhand store called Beggars and Choosers, reputed to be the absolute best place for 50 miles in any direction to put together a Halloween costume. Otherwise, it's a slightly self-consciously folksy little place that does a lot of antiques trade and has a couple of historical markers out by the highway. Nothing much going on, but I always get the feeling that's how Pittsboro likes it. It's about 25 minutes of extremely pretty country driving from either Durham or Raleigh, and whenever I go there, I am a little stunned that a place so nice can exist so close to a major media market covered up in suburbs. I'd been to that book sale before during actual business hours. It happens late enough in the fall that it's dark before the sale ends at night. I was the last customer out the door one time, and that's how I noticed the book people. They were parked down the block, trying and failing to look nonchalant. The window of the minivan they'd driven were tinted really damn dark, way darker in the back than I imagined would be street legal, but that stuff is no match for a vampire's eyes. I saw them sitting there watching the staff lock up behind me while I lugged 3 big bags of books over to my Firebird on the far side of the lot. Let me assure you, just in case you decide to go around playing amateur burglar or otherwise finding occasions requiring stealth, pulling up to a retail establishment right before closing time and watching them lock up is a dead giveaway. I got in my car, circled the block, killed the lights, and pulled up around behind the book sale building to park. Unobserved, I slipped across a dewy lawn and up to the side of the building where I could peek around at the front and see what the as yet unknown book people were doing. Mostly they were standing around looking nervous, while the oldest of them all, a little old lady with a stark white shock of hair that stuck out in all directions and a slightly off-kilter grin, was hunched over picking the lock. Her fingers shook, but I think that might have actually helped her hit all the tumblers. I could hear the click when the door swung open and everyone let out the breath they'd been holding. They piled inside, spread out, and started milling around. Vampires are nothing if not voyeurs. I peeked in a window to watch. Brothers and sisters. The smooth, mellow voice came from a preppy middle-aged woman. She had once-upon-a-cheerleader hair and a sweater tied around her neck by the arms like an Izod ad from 1984. The others didn't stop milling as she spoke. She stepped up onto the end of a table to address them. please take a few moments to select your implements for tonight's ritual. Do not rush, and when a book speaks to you, do not shy away because it isn't what you had hoped, or because it's what you feared. You will know the book as the book will know you, and when hand meets spine, you will know whether the book in your hand is to be your tool for tonight's working. I waited and watched as they walked around, some of them eyes closed and bumping into tables, others walking directly to specific sections like crime and classics and holding out their hands, fluttering them like nervous butterflies, then finally reaching out and jerking a book from the boxes that sat atop each table. Obviously, some of them weren't thrilled with what they got, but the lady had been pretty clear. The book they got was the book they were getting. They reassembled in the middle of the room, but flinched as a car went by outside. They worried it was someone coming back. It wasn't. Hurriedly, raggedly, they formed a loose circle around the woman who had spoken before. She addressed them again, sounding rehearsed. As the world is an expression of the god and goddess, the Lord and the Lady, the sun and the moon, so too are the books in our hands the expressions of their authors. Writers craft the worlds, calling out to them to be created. They are the progenitors of whole realities, insisting upon their own existence. As above, so below, and as below, so above. The gods on whom we call take the shapes dictated by a world in need of them, and the world they divinely fashion has the form it takes because it can take no other. The world and the divine are the hand and the glove and the hand. The cycle of creation and destruction, life and death, spring and summer and autumn and winter is not a repetition but a moving forward, a progression, and we are the ones who witness the spin of the tire, the turn of the press, the pen stroke of the hand authoring the cycle. There was a pause, and I could see her words had a soothing and bolstering effect on them. They all stood a little straighter and a little more solemn now. They'd forgotten all about cops and security systems and library volunteers who might forget a purse. The stooped old lady with the mad smile had her eyes closed and a sort of serenity on her face I rarely saw in sane people. The blonde lady leading them took a few seconds to look directly at each of them in turn before she spoke again. Maria is in the east, so we shall start with her. Open the book, sister, and with it light the fire of our first watchtower. The Latina cracked her book open to a random page. She cleared her throat, and I heard her read in the halting, slightly uncertain tone of one who doesn't regularly read aloud, that is to say, almost everyone in the world. Ho ho, Commander! It's moving. The machines are ready. Fuel, my commander. We must have fuel and nothing else. Her voice grew in confidence and enthusiasm so that the last sentence was delivered with something like real feeling. She then stated the title with a much more reserved, subdued, almost subservient tone. Cement. The blonde woman, the priestess I later learned, named Lorraine, turned to the younger of the two men, a 40-something white guy built like a barrel of molasses. He opened his book and read in one breath, all in a go, running the title together with the text. The cutting edge on even the most well-made knife is not permanent knife skills illustrated to user's guide. He looked a little embarrassed by that, but Lorraine favored him with a nod that seemed to indicate maybe this was a deep truth, worth hearing once or twice. She turned to a woman in her 50s who held up a thin volume and read, "His movements have the attractiveness of the awkward man who has learned to circumvent this condition by slowing everything down. Cat-like in his languid movements, with his slightly hunched shoulders, hands a little too big for his body, like he's never quite known what to do with them." She paused and then said, "Crime," by Irvine Welsh. Her voice was gentle and plodding, and wasn't at all unlike the description she had read from the book. Next up was a frumpy woman in her 30s. She had on blue, stretchy fat pants and a shapeless sweater kind of thing that zipped up the front. In my mind, I immediately classified her as a recognizable variety of bonbon and daytime TV addict. She held up a thick hardback and read aloud, "Windows there are none in our houses, for the light comes to us alike in our homes and out of them, by day and by night, equally at all times and in all places, whence we know not. It was in old days, with our learned men, an interesting and oft investigated question, what is the origin of light? And the solution of it has been repeatedly attempted, with no other result than to crowd our lunatic asylums with the would-be solvers." She paused then, Flatland, a romance of many dimensions. Lorraine smiled a little, an excellent lesson in humility. She turned towards Warren, who opened his book and cleared his throat. You were either with her or you were against her. She believed that her father was not her real father, that her mother had tried to drown her in a pond when she was a child, that her pulmonary specialist wanted to have sex with her, that in death she would be met by Carl Jung, the Virgin Mary, and Merlin the Magician, that she had done her work on earth and her work was good, that she was one of those who had been chosen to herald the coming new order of beautiful humanity, that in a former life she had died a water death as a Roman galley slave shackled to the oars, that men were shits and her children were hostile, that her smoking was her business, so mind your own fucking business, that her son was an artist just like she was, that she and I should go into therapy together. He smiled a little and looked up. The Afterlife, a memoir. Most of them had chuckled a little at the lines about smoking and about men being shits, and Lorraine was among those who had. The Stepford soccer mom looked concealed a human being. She flicked her eyes to the last person, the hunched little old lady, who opened her eyes and her book at the same time, eyes falling to the page. Her voice creaked out. She kept going, her sneakers slapping the pavement until she came to a barrier of 1,000 split-open garbage bags. She crawled over it, taking the time to pick up a few interesting items like a broken salt shaker and a soggy copy of National Geographic, and stuffed them into her bag. Then she was over the barrier, and she kept walking, the breath still rasping in her lungs and her body trembling. That had been close, she thought. The demons almost got me. But glory be to Jesus, when he arrives in his flying saucer from the planet Jupiter, I'll be there on the golden shore to kiss his hand. She looked up. Swan Song by Robert McCammon. Lorraine bowed slightly and then turned to look at and address each of them, moving slowly so that everyone got looked at while she spoke. Fuel for the engine, alienation, insanity, a loss of sharpness, awkwardness, strong opinions that may or may not run counter to the facts, Jesus on a flying saucer. These are all stories that say to me that whatever we summon tonight will be able to guide those of us who might be stuck in some rut, alienated from the knowledge of how to move forward. Are there other interpretations? The Latina spoke, and evidently they didn't have to wait to be called on for this part. I think whatever we summon might be itself alienated and stuck in a rut. Warren nodded his head. The thing we call on will be difficult to work with, not of this world. It's going to have its own way of doing things and its own understanding. It's going to think we're crazy, the old woman said. Her eyes were crystal clear and her smile was gone. She was down to business. The bonbon addict didn't say anything, but she nodded along. Another woman didn't say a word, just shook her head and clucked her tongue. Lorraine nodded. You're all in agreement. Let us see. Let us call to the beyond and see what we have summoned with these words. She lifted her hands and started to say something. It sounded like Latin, but maybe not perfect textbook Catholic school Latin. And I couldn't resist, because I love a big entrance. I stepped around with the speed of a vampire, turned the knob, opened the door, and said with a great big shit-eating grin, Don't bother asking, lady. I am already here. There we go. Does